Dragi naši knjigoljupci, nadam se da ste se okupali, odmorili i da ste spremni za nove radne pobjede, pa tako i za nove epizode podcasta Između redaka. Ovu sezonu ponovno započinjemo sa jednim inozemnim autorom. Ona je došla iz daleke Amerike na naš Liburnicon, a danas je ovdje s nama u našem studiju. Iza nje je 10 knjiga, od kojih je 5 prevedeno na hrvatski, a o daljnjim knjigama, prijevodima i planovima pričat će nam ona sama, Laini Taylor. So Laini, welcome to Croatia, welcome to Zagreb, and welcome to our studio. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
How long have you been here for?
Just, about a week.
Okay, but Zagreb wasn't your first destination, right? You were here for another event, so tell me a bit about it.
I was here for Liburnicon. Liburnicon, thank you. And Opatija, and it was really beautiful. This festival for games and fantasy held, it was in the faculty for tourism there, right on the sea, and we spent, my daughter came with me, and we spent several days swimming and walking along the beach there, and it was gorgeous, so we had a wonderful time.
Yeah, it's really practical to come to Croatia during the summer, especially in Opatija, so it was really nice of the organizer to
I know, you don't very often get a festival invitation to a seaside resort in the summer. It's not common, so I was definitely going to come to this.
Yeah, because I think that our biggest convention is Sveracon, and it's held in Zagreb in May, so yeah just ignore that one.
Oh no, I'd love to come for that too, but especially to be able to come somewhere during the high season is pretty cool. Yeah.
Do you usually go to conventions in the US or Europe?
Yeah, I love being invited to one's international festivals, and the last few years has been not much, but also I haven't had a new book come out in the last few years either, but I'm not a fast writer, and I feel like I'm usually late with my books, and so there have been several times where I got an invitation that I really would love to say yes to, but I had to stay home and finish my book instead, and so I had to say no to places like Singapore and to go to Colombia and Spain, and I have gone to some cool ones too, but there was some that still hurt that I had to say no to. I'm like, just write faster. And I thought for sure with my current book that I would be done before this, but no.
Yeah, we'll talk more about it afterwards, about the writer's block and everything. You're really open on your blog. But let's stay at the conventions for just a little while.
Sure.
Yeah, how important are the conventions for fans of SF, or science fiction or fantasy, and also for the authors?
I don't know how important they are, but they're really fun and we love them. And they've gotten so popular. There are so many different fan-oriented conventions, and they're not all literature focused, but I think even the big comics and games and fantasy conventions a lot of them have added a good literature track, which is nice. Lucca in Italy, that I get to go to this year, they are more, I think, about comics and games, but now they also celebrate books now too, so that's great. And all the writers that I know, love to go to any kind of conference or convention to see each other partly, and to get to interact with readers. Just to have that, the interaction makes it feel real, that there's somebody out there reading the books. Of course, now I think, nowadays you interact with readers in so many ways, but the conventions are just so fun.
There are also cosplay competitions. Have you ever seen someone cosplaying a character from your books?
Yes, that was one thing. When Daughter of Smoke and Bone came out, I didn't really consciously think about those kind of things, like making visually distinct characters and items. But after I saw what people were doing with that, I realized, wow, this is really something to strive to do, to make a character that looks distinct so it's easy for cosplay. And because it was so cool seeing readers come to book signings with Karu's blue hair and the necklace, and she's an easy cosplay, so that makes it better. With my next books, it's a little bit more intense because you have to actually color your skin, so you have to be more committed. But still, it's still great, and I love to see that. It's super fun. That was something I hadn't thought about. It didn't occur to me to think about cosplay like that. Really, at first. Or, a lot of the things. I had my writer dreams, things like seeing my books in translation, but there was things I didn't even think to dream about, and now I'm like, that are some of my favorite things. So.
Yeah, you mentioned in your bio that you wanted to be a writer since you were little, and your first book was published in your 30s. Have you been writing before that, or have you started writing in your 30s?
I always, was thinking of writing and maybe writing a little bit and thinking of myself as a writer, but after college, in my 20s, and I did write in college and took writing classes and wrote some stories, but it didn't really happen for me because I was a literature major, and when I graduated, I was reading literature and literary fiction, and when I tried to write, I tried to write the kind of books that I was reading, I just really didn't find anything to say, and so, and I just felt young and inexperienced and had nothing to contribute, sort of, so I made excuses, I think, for myself not writing. And also I was working at a publishing house in that time, and I was at a computer all day, editing travel guidebooks, actually. And the end of the day, I just didn't want to write. So, and then time just passes on you. And then sometime I went back to school to study illustration. And then sometime in there, I began to read fantasy books again. And I think I was away from university long enough that I could start reading again the books that I had loved as a younger reader. And I started reading books for young readers, YA and middle grade, which hadn't really been there hadn't been as many when I was a young adult. And it had just exploded in that time. And I knew it because I was a bookseller as well. I knew the books, but I hadn't really read them. And so I started finding these authors like Garth Nix, Philip Pullman, and just really fell in love with fantasy again and with books for young readers. And when I thought about writing in that frame of mind, there was no limit. It wasn't difficult to think of what to write about. And all of a sudden I realized, I had found my genre. And so then in my late 20s, I started writing, but it still took me a long time because I do struggle with perfectionism and this sort of, really, my brain is very difficult to motivate or to it's hard to explain, but the perfectionism, I define it as like, you get held in place by anything you perceive as imperfect, and everything is imperfect, so it's really hard to move forward and write a whole book. You just want to keep fixing, revising the things you've already written, and so it feels like kind of like OCD, obsessive compulsive, and it's really challenging.
Have you been diagnosed?
I don't have it in other things, so I don't want to call it OCD, but that's like the closest I can describe it. And there must be some shades of, but I have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, which is also fun, which is also a motivational
especially deficit. When you have to sit in one place, and write something for hours. And it actually does. The things, staying on a project for a long time can be a challenge, and a lot of women especially, don't get diagnosed until they're older, and it's changing. Anyways, so I have a lot of brain challenges to overcome. But in my 30s, early 30s, I went to a writing conference for the first time, and it was the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and it's a big international organization. And there's a ton of conferences in the US. And then all of a sudden I was surrounded by people who were finishing writing their books, and there was editors and agents and illustrators and publishers and, speaking, and it became really clear, okay, these editors are real people and they really need books, and these people are actually writing those books, and can I really not do this? And so it gave me that sort of reality check, I guess, like to finally be able to focus and finish my first book. Do you think it was harder for you because you were in the publishing business and also bookselling business, or you had some context that made it easier? I mean, harder in the context of being under pressure, of sending someone your work, maybe someone you potentially work with?
I don't think so, because the publisher that I worked for was Lonely Planet, and they're so separate from fiction, mainstream publishing. There would be like no crossover at all. So like, I guess I never really thought of it in the same way. They were just like their own thing. But it made me a better editor, self-editor maybe. But there wouldn't be any of the same people. But it did maybe take away from my writing time. I would say was the only thing during those years. But yeah, completely different industry.
Okay, so yeah. You weren't under the pressure. Mm-hmm. You published your first book in 2004. I think, and it was a graphic novel which your husband illustrated. What happened after that?
So that was called The Drowned, and it was with Image Comics, and we had thought of doing another one, and we actually, it was going to be a vampire graphic novel, and we thought, well, let's set it in Prague. So we went and traveled to Prague and pretended like we were, like the vampires lived there, and went around the city and did our research, and then had a great time. And then we didn't end up doing that book because at the time I got some interest in my first novel from an editor, and so I focused on finishing that. It was my first, it was for younger readers. It's a fairy book called Blackbringer. And so then that other thing fell away, but then a few years later when I started writing this other book, I decided to set it in Prague, and I had all of that research and looking at the city as a setting was in my head already, so that became the setting for Daughter of Smoke and Bone. Yeah.
And this kind of inspired you for the trilogy of Daughter of Smoke and Bone?
The idea came completely from characters. And it was this one day, I call it like this mythic day in my writing life, where I had been struggling with another book I tried to write. And it was science fiction, and I call it my Ballerinas in Space book, which is being mean to myself. I think it would have been a cool book, but I couldn't get into it. And so I was not having any fun writing. And my house was very clean because every time instead of writing,
You said you don't have OCD, so.
Right. So I was really struggling, and writing was such a chore that I thought, okay, I'm going to give myself a day to write something else just for fun. And I didn't know what it was going to be, but immediately these characters appeared, and it was this blue-haired girl and her father who was a monster, and he had a shop where he traded wishes for teeth and all these things. And it was like the best writing day. I wrote all day, and it all just seemed like it came from nowhere. And it never had happened to me before, and so it was very exciting. And then later, as I was developing it and thinking, where would it be set? Then I thought, oh, Prague is perfect. But it wasn't like the first thing, and also the romantic relationship also wasn't the first thing. The first thing was the father-daughter relationship and Karoo. Yeah.
Did you always have in mind that it will be a trilogy, or that happened afterwards?
I knew when I could see the end of the first book, I knew it was more than one book, but I didn't know how many books. So when I sold it to my publisher, it was the deal was for 3 books, and the first 2 would definitely be connected, and then the third would be to be determined. And so I was partway through the second book when I was like, I'm going to need another book. So yeah, it was very much figuring it out as I go.
You published your whole trilogy, 3 books in span of 4 years, and then, I mean, at least Goodreads is saying that. Maybe. In my mind it's 5, but that's probably including writing time, so I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
but yeah.
Still, it's a very short period of time, and now you're writing a lot about writer's block. I guess you didn't have writer's block when you were writing.
No, I did. I always did.
Or you were very pressured by the deadline your publisher put on you.
And even then, in YA, there's YA and publishing in the US at least, there's definitely a pressure to have a book a year, and I didn't make that deadline. For book 3, I think it was 2 years or a year and a half or something, and that felt like a failure, And then with Strange the Dreamer as well, there was longer than a year in between, and that there's always a lot of pressure to get them out in a year, and that's just not enough time for me. And then my current book, and I've always had, and I think when I talk about writer's block, it's not necessarily the kind of, I think a lot of people picture like where you can't write at all for months or years, and it's not like that for me. It's just that it's always a challenge, and there's just it's exhausting because you're fighting with yourself to get your work done, and there's a lot of writers that don't experience that don't have whatever neurology going on that some of us do, that they're like, oh, it doesn't exist. It's just that, and they like to say, writer's block doesn't exist. It's just that you have taken a wrong turn in the story and you haven't figured out how, or all these things. And that's great that that's what it's like for them. But it frustrates me so much, because it's like saying depression doesn't exist because you haven't had it before. And I just want to be very vocal about it, because I want people to realize it's not okay to say that, to negate other people's experience just because it's not your experience. And I think a lot of people, they don't think of it. They're not being intentionally insensitive. They believe it's true, and it's not true. A lot of people really struggle with getting creativity, not just writing, creativity on the page. There's a lot of mental blocks. And
I've read Michelle Obama biography, and she was mentioning that her husband, Barack Obama, actually missed the deadline for his first book, I think, and he had to pay the fee because he got some advance for the book. So it was really comforting to read that one Barack Obama missed his deadline. So yeah.
I didn't know that I didn't know any of that, but it's really hard to imagine that they made him pay a fee, isn't it?
I don't know. I will find a quote and.
Oh, I believe you. But it's like really hard to believe that that really happened.
That was actually before he was president. So.
Oh, it wasn't the one that came out after?
No.
Oh, I thought you meant like his memoir.
I don't know if it was
Did he have
ever
a book
written.
Before?
I don't know. I will check it afterwards.
Because he had that big high-profile book after, and I'm like, no publisher would like risk it. But I don't know. I mean, he probably did have a book before.
Okay, so
I don't know.
Yeah. Long story short, he missed the deadline as well. So yeah.
Good to know. Me and Barack.
Okay, so Strange the Dreamer came afterwards, and it was actually a duology. Was it because it was really hard to write a trilogy, or is it because you just planned it to be duology?
Neither. It's actually very funny. It was supposed to be a standalone because it's very hard to write a trilogy.
Okay.
And then it turned out to not be a standalone, and I had to tell my publisher, actually, I think it's going to be 2 books. And they if that's okay with you. And they said, yes, that was okay. And the other thing is that it wasn't actually supposed to be Strange the Dreamer. It was supposed to be Muse of Nightmares. And it was always originally conceived as Sarai's story. But part of my process is, at the beginning, like, I think I know a lot about the story, but I have to find the right way into it. And until I find the right way into it, I can't move forward. I'm like, that's not it yet. That's not setting up the right story. And I was writing different openings for months. And it wasn't until I was writing a chapter that introduced this librarian. First, he was other things, but he became a librarian. And I wanted to try seeing the world through his eyes first. And he was always going to be the love interest, but not the main character. And as I got to know him so that we could lead into the story in his perspective, he stole the whole book and became the main character. And that was Laszlo Strange. And so the moment that it happened is when I wrote a paragraph where it said that when his first day on the job as a junior librarian, a huge volume of fairy tales fell off the shelf and broke his nose. And at that moment, I knew that he was the main character, because he was literally shaped by stories, in every way. We already know that he's obsessed with myths and legends and fairy tales. And then at that moment, I was like, okay, now this is his story. And then part of thinking about that was conceiving that it was a duology, and that the second book would be, they're both split POV, but the first book is his journey, his hero's journey, and the second book is Sarai's. So yeah, I tried to know up front what a book is going to be, but I can't know. And I've, it drives me crazy because I want it to be clear and simple, but I've realized over the years that that the books that I need to write are the kind of book that I don't know up front exactly what's going to happen, because that doesn't hold my interest. And if I do know exactly what's going to happen and think this is going to be easy, I just sabotage myself because I get bored in the middle and then I change everything. So something else happens. But that's simplifying it. But I think for every book, it's me working something out and figuring out the questions that are really haunting me in that period of the world. And trying to write something that's much bigger and weirder and, I don't know, deeper, I guess, than I could think of at the beginning. Like, I have to take this whole journey and, you know, be many different people over the course of a few years and figure out what the book needs to be. It's not something like, I just don't want to write the book that I could write in 1 month, or like I need to create opportunities for the book to grow in strange and unexpected ways, and then sort of follow it and see what happens and be surprised by it, or else that's not interesting to me.
There are a lot of authors who are researching the tropes that are popular now, and then they write a book in the span of a couple of months. You're not that author.
No, but I would love to also do that, you know, and say like nothing.
Wouldn't we all?
I mean, I would love to still write the books the way I write them, but I definitely would love to also find out somehow to leave my brain like in the desk drawer, the part of it that worries too much, and write something easier for fun. I would say, not to say that those books are easy, but I make it more difficult for myself, and I would like to somehow shut off that lever and just write a different kind of book that is more of a formula and just more playful, and maybe not be late with it. You know, all those things. I would love to do that as well, and just write different kinds of books, because I love I love books that are, you know, they just are what they are, and they are a formula, and they're colorful, and they're the tropes, and I really think that tropes are, I think of tropes as like a plug that plugs straight into our chest, you know, it's something we need, and there's a place that it just gives us emotionally exactly what we need at the right time. And like tropes just do that, this extremely direct connection emotionally, and I think that's great, and I love that, and I would like to play around with that kind of writing more.
Well, I think that your books were certainly plugged into someone's chest or heart, because for the first book, Daughter of Smoke and Bone, you have more than 300,000 reviews on Goodreads. Wow. Is it motivational, or are you under the pressure because of those numbers?
No, I think that is just motivational. I think I don't like to hear sales numbers, because
reviews sound better.
Yeah, or and not even like reading reviews necessarily, but those kind of numbers, that sounds great. But sometimes you hear numbers that the publisher might be happy with, but like the only numbers you usually hear are things like, you know, the public only ever hears J.K. Rowling numbers or whatever. So anything else, even if it's good in the publishing world, it doesn't sound good. And so then if you hear your sales numbers, it can not necessarily be inspiring. I don't like to think about those things, but I do like, I really like knowing that people are reading them, and yeah.
Well, Croatia is a really small market, and we have a saying that when you sell 1,000 books, it's like really good in terms of Croatian books. Yeah. So yeah,
that's great.
And it sounds really terrible, 1,000 books. Like, I
mean, it's really, the context is really hard to achieve, because you only hear those big numbers, and so yeah. I think 1,000. That's a nice number.
You write fantasy novels, but also fantasy novels for young adults. How come you started writing for young adults and not adults?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great answer for that, but I think that partly it's because when I found my way back to fantasy, it was through books for young adults. Like the authors that I mentioned, like Garth Nix and Philip Pullman. And, you know, a lot of this was at the time certainly triggered by the success of Harry Potter. It was in that time when it was just, you know, became prominent in a new way. At a time in my life when I had become receptive to fantasy again and purged off my literary snobbery, and those books were for young readers, and it just felt natural. And I don't think many young adult authors exactly know why it appeals to them, why that's their right voice, but it felt right for me. And I don't know, I feel like especially Daughter of Smoke and Bone, I was writing for, you know, my 17-year-old self, and maybe I still am partly, you know, I don't know, my 17-year-old self and my current self side by side, we're not that different. So yeah, I don't know exactly. I think just some of us, I've heard it said that we have a set sort of, I don't know, emotional age or whatever that sort of stays consistent. And some people are never really young. You know what I mean? And some people are always young. But I think that time of our lives is just an incredibly interesting and fraught time when we're figuring out who we are, and everything is new and exciting and terrifying and dramatic. And so it's a really, as an author, it's a great character age, but also as an author, it's a great fandom age. So I didn't think about that before, but it just turns out that the young adult readership is really awesome. And that's not only teens, it's teens and adults who read YA, and they're just great. And I think fantasy fans are also great. And so it's like the best of both worlds. So it's been really nice to be part of that. Whereas I think, you know, fans of mainstream fiction, it's just not the same. There's not the same passion.
You've mentioned that older adults are also reading young adult books. So why do you think that is? I mean, I've been reading young adult books for months now, and exclusively young adult books, and I can't put my finger why.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why either. I think that's one of those questions. But I think, again, it's partly that this time of life is thrilling, and I think also, and this goes along with, well, in a way with genre, but writing for young people, you have to be very mindful that you could lose your reader in one page if you bore them. And so there's not a lot of self-indulgence in YA books. Like even in adult fantasy, you know, they get so long, and you might have a whole chapter on the economic system of this country or whatever. You're never going to find that in YA. It's like they're almost always page turners, so there's that. And they're usually hopeful, so there's that. You know, even if they deal with really difficult subject matter, I think most people who write for young people are writing from a place of wanting to help, and so they're not generally going to be, you're not going to leave them feeling worse than when you started. And so I think that's a big part of it, is that there's a sort of balm to it. It gives you hope in some way. I think most of them try to leave you with a feeling of hope. And so I think, you know, when you get, there's a lot of grimdark in the world, and especially in fantasy, and well, not maybe, especially in maybe literary fiction, especially. But in YA, it tends to be more positive, because we're trying to help young readers get through their lives and see themselves and identify and then feel stronger and able to move forward.
Oh, which is something we all need, especially in the last 2 years. So yeah, that's why I'm reading
right?
novels. Yeah, thank you.
It's
for
healing.
your
It's healing in some way.
You mentioned that you love to see your books translated. In how many languages have your books been translated, and what does it mean to have your books translated in Croatian?
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm not great with remembering numbers. I'm always asking my agent, how many is it again? But I think Daughter of Smoke and Bone is in maybe 38 languages, which is so cool. And that was definitely one of my big author dreams, was like to have, you know, a shelf of my own editions and then foreign editions. And when I started, my first 3 books only got a few translations, and that was great. But then when Daughter of Smoke and Bone, I started receiving those, I needed to use a different bookshelf, and it was just so exciting getting those in the mail and arranging them on the shelf. And I never actually received the Daughter of Smoke and Bone in Croatian.
Really?
I don't know what happened.
Why?
I don't know, but I'm bringing them home with me.
I just wanted to tell you, we will give it to you.
I have books 2 and 3. I don't think I have book 1, but I definitely got Strange and Muse, and the covers are gorgeous, and that's been one of the covers actually that on Instagram and stuff that people have responded to the most. They really love those covers, so that's
I would
cool.
ask you, what do you think about translation? But obviously you can't think anything. But I know that you're a fan of the translator, Jelena Pataki. So we have to give her an honorary mention because she's a fan of this show. So.
Yes, well, hi Jelena. And it was really great to get to meet her in Opatija and to hang out with her. And we talked a little bit about translation. And yes, I will never know how poetic, or except when people tell me, you know, how well the translation was done. But we did talk a little bit about, and she was telling me somehow that a little bit with the choice of Kosmara, is that how you pronounce it?
Košmara.
Košmara is a little bit different of a word than maybe would have been primarily used in Croatian.
It sounds like archaic or something like that. Yeah, it would be mora. It's like a nightmare, mora.
Yeah.
And košmar is something that I wouldn't use in ordinary language.
Yeah, so she was telling me that a little bit. Yeah. And I think that's so interesting to, you know,
to witness
the choices like that. And sometimes when I'm writing, I definitely, I'll have a moment where I'm like, a moment of pity for the future translators, because I know that my writing style must be very challenging, because I use a lot of figurative language, a lot of metaphor, and I also invent a lot of words and break all of the rules of grammar and usage and syntax, and so for effect. And so I know that it must be not the easiest books to translate. This is like
a public apology from you to all the translators.
Yes, and a thank you and gratitude to translators. Yeah.
You published Muse of Nightmares in 2018.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So, to ask you the question that I think all of the authors hate, especially George R. Martin, what is happening with the new book?
The new book is late. It has been late for a while now, but it is almost finished. And it's been strange. It's my first adult book, but you know, that is, my books are published as adult in some markets. You know, in England they're published as adult, in Australia and some market, I don't know. So I don't think it's going to feel so different to people, but it is in a different world. And I just, you know, it's been an experience of, you know, I've already explained how I can't see the story from the beginning, and I've described this one as like you're trying to draw a life model, but every time you look down, she moves. You know? So the story just, it's not that the story keeps changing. The basics are the same, but there's a lot of pieces that have to fit. I have so many writing metaphors. It's like there's like a Rubik's Cube with like 1,000 sides, and you solve one side and then you look and you realize the other sides are all messed up. So it's been really, it's been tricky, but I think also I've just been processing a lot of just world stuff, and that, you know, it's been interesting for all of us these last few years, but I think part of when I'm writing a book, you know, all those things are coming out in some way, and definitely is the case with this book. It ends up having like a big environmental component, like I mean, it doesn't, maybe it won't feel that way to the reader, but until you know, it's a different, it's been this sort of retreat, because, you know, I feel with climate catastrophe and everything just is weighing so much on me, that this book was a sort of a solace, because it's a vision of the way we could live in the world instead of the way we do live in the world, and you know, and the way we treat the world. But that's not primary part of the story. That's just the way it is in the book, and just trying to figure out, I guess, the story. I'm like, on the surface, what I'm thinking of is figuring out the story, but underneath that, I'm figuring out other things. And even though I don't necessarily know what they are, it doesn't come together until those things come together and appear on the page. And you know, there's a lot of examples in my other books, like in Strange and Muse, like things that I didn't think were important at the beginning of the book. I just came up with something because it was cool and interesting, like the character of Minya, who's a 6-year-old girl who's been 6 years old for 15 years, and she doesn't grow up. And I just thought that was cool and interesting. And then, lo and behold, by the end of the book, you know, if you find out, I found out, realized along the way what it meant that the 6-year-old survivor of trauma had not aged, and had, you know, what it meant, what had really been going on with her. And she really became the emotional core of the book for me, and so meaningful in ways that I had not consciously realized or planned. And I think that the book would be not the book that it is without her. And so I think I'm always giving that sort of thing, you know, the space to form while I'm working on the surface of the story and what happens. And I might not know why it feels right or doesn't feel right, until finally everything comes together. And so I'm always sort of trying things, hoping for that feeling of it coming together and being bigger than I had planned, bigger than the sum of its parts. And so it's like, I don't know, it's like a kind of summoning, you know? I was saying in my speech at the festival that it's like, you know, in fairy tales where the character meets an old lady at the crossroads and she wants a drink of water, and then, you know, the two mean sisters turn her away, but then the young sister or brother, the good one, the fairy tales, it's always the youngest that's the good one.
I have a younger brother. I would disagree with you.
Well, no, don't disagree. No, I'm a middle child, so I also disagree. As well. Yes, it's just in fairy tales, right? It's always the youngest that's the virtuous one, that gives the old crone a drink of water and then gets a gift for it, because the old crone is, of course, a fairy in disguise. And so I was comparing it. This ridiculous, inefficient writing process that I have is like going into the forest every day with your pitcher of water, hoping there'll be an old lady that is thirsty, you know, that you can give her a drink and she will give you magic. She's not always there, but you have to keep going because one day maybe she will be. And so that's what I think writing a novel is like for me. Keep going into the forest with a pitcher of water, hoping that the witch will be there, the good witch.
Could you give us an elevator pitch for your new book?
I cannot, because
no.
It is not announced yet.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
My publisher has, I think they're waiting for the author to finish it before they announce it.
Yeah, because don't want it to turn for a George novel, the George R. R. Martin story, right?
Yeah, you know, I saw something recently that it was the first thing I'd seen in a long time that maybe indicated that he actually maybe would finish it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, he always gives some hints like that, but I stopped trusting him. Yeah,
I feel a lot of compassion for him. I mean, its story is so huge. I don't know. I can't even imagine having that many characters at large at once.
And to bring them at one point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really rooting for it because, and I stopped watching the show, but from what I hear, that's not the ending I want. You know, I want him to write. I want the ending he would write now and see what it would be, and to redeem the
showrunners. Yeah, agreed.
So more than ever, I'm hoping now that he finishes it. But if he doesn't, I just I don't feel too bad because, you know, I think he's got a pretty good life. But it can't be fun, all that pressure.
Yeah. I presume it can. Now that you've mentioned it, what kind of books do you like to read, and what authors influenced you as a writer?
I like to read all kinds of books, but I do think you know, what I love the most is fantasy, and I would say the most influential were those ones back that got me reading and writing fantasy again. And I've mentioned a few times. So the Sabriel books by Garth Nix, are those in Croatian? Do you know?
Not that I've heard of.
You should check those out.
They've turn around to your publisher. No.
We did an event together recently with we have the same Italian publisher, and they were having like I think they're maybe their 30th anniversary or 25th anniversary. They've been around for a long time. They were one of the earliest YA fantasy successes, really, in this sort of newer industry, and were very formative for the genre, I think, because all of us, you know, of a certain age, you know, read that. I didn't read it as a teenager. I read it in my, you know, late 20s, early 30s, and it was like, wow. And they're just really cool books. He's Australian, and he's written a lot of books, but that series just keeps on going. It's like, so fans love it, and it keeps getting new editions everywhere. Like, that's what we did. The event just got a new Italian edition. So those, and then the Dark Materials books by Philip Pullman those were two series that I read, you know, when I was dabbling in writing and trying to find my voice, I guess, and it sort of like opened the doors to fantasy again. So I like to say those. Some of the other writers that I really love are, one of my favorite writers is from New Zealand, and her name is Elizabeth Knox, and she writes young adult and adult literary fiction, horror, fantasy, everything, but it's always like really beautiful and literary, but also like has the payoff that you want from fantasy or horror or whatever, like genre payoff, but literary writing. It's really cool stuff. and Frances Harding in UK. I really love her writing. I don't know, there's very many, but yeah.
I've read somewhere that there will be a movie about daughter of Smoke and Bone. Is there any truth to it?
At this point, there is not any truth to it. That was in development some years ago at Universal, and it got through a lot of stages of development, but not all the stages. So that went away, and I got the rights back. And so, you know, we're hoping there's some things, you know, we're talking about now, but I have learned how just, you know, lightning has to strike really just in the right place for anything to happen. There's so many things that have to come together, and so I try not to like ever get my hopes up about it because I have no control. But it's fun to have the conversations with you know, people in the business and talk about it. But it's just yeah, and you know, hopefully there will be more continually more original adaptations of books and original scripts as well, versus just remakes of the same things over and over. That gets really frustrating. You know?
Yeah, this is actually my last question to you, because currently we're witnessing two phenomena. One is Netflix and the adaptations of, I think, almost every young adult book there is, and also Book Talk, a movement on TikTok, which made a lot of kids read more. We're witnessing it in Croatia, and we are witnessing it in the world. So did it have any effect on your books?
Well, so Netflix, the YA books that you're mostly seeing, with some exceptions, are the less expensive ones to make. Like they're not fantasy, except for some, like Shadow and Bone.
Yeah.
So there are some big budget things, but the ones that you're seeing a lot of are the ones that they can make for less money, because fantasy is just really expensive. And so
yeah, I mean, I've watched Sandman yesterday, and it's
my God, it's so beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And actually, when I was reading about your Strange the Dreamer book, it kind of reminded me of the Sandman. So
yeah, I'm like, yeah, my husband and I were joking. We haven't finished it yet. We've maybe seen 5 episodes, and we were like, just get this creative team to do it, because it's so beautifully done. But yeah, it's definitely harder for something that's going to cost a lot.
It's really, really, really expensive. So
yeah, and so they have to, things have to come together. And Netflix, I mean, we've seen all the craziness with Netflix this year and their business, you know, and they canceling successful shows, and the way they decide what to make and what to continue is like based on some thing that nobody in the world understands except for them. And it's just frustrating, like some of the things they've canceled that were, I don't know. I don't know. But that said, that kind of streaming platform, whether it's Netflix or somebody else, would be, you know, the ideal for sure.
Books, yeah.
And so one hopes that they continue to make big budget fantasy. You know, there's some things that came out this year. You know, besides Shadow and Bone, there was the Wheel of Time. Mm-hmm. We've got the Lord of the Rings stuff coming out.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to it. No, I didn't like the trailer very much, but I'm looking forward to House of Dragon. I mean,
yeah, I read some things about that made me go, but it looks really cool.
Yeah,
and
so fingers crossed. For
and I hope that the Tolkien will be good. I don't know. I think the trailer I thought it looked pretty cool, but some of the characters, I don't know. We'll see. So I hope that continues to be a thing, because they're so trend driven. And so if something they spend a lot of money on, does badly, then everyone's afraid to do something in this similar. Only with fantasy though. If it's action movie, like when action, but even rom-coms kind of went away. You know, there used to be so many, and like now it's really hard to find rom-coms even, or maybe they're coming back, but like action movies, for sure, or thrillers, or even sci-fi, or like those, as long as they're masculine, they can do as badly as they want, and there'll be a million more of them. It doesn't have any effect. I don't know. But so like I'm always praying for fantasy to do well, so that they'll just have the courage to do more.
Okay, and are you trending on Book Talk? Maybe.
I don't like. I'm only sort of very vaguely aware of how that works, and I'm not on TikTok.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, I think it's really cool, but I'm not sure I understand like who's driving the success or the phenomenon, or like if the creators, like the authors, have to be good on TikTok, or if it's just the
No, I think it's just
a matter of who the book talkers like and what they choose to promote. Like, I don't know. I know the publishers are like, like, how can we make use of this? But I think the whole beauty of it is that it's spontaneous.
Really it's really natural.
So when you hear like, marketing departments being like, how can we, I don't know,
make it viral? Yeah, it doesn't usually work like that.
Right. So I don't know. But I love that whenever there's a new passionate community, I don't know, is there like a particular kind of book that's doing well? It seems like more like indie published stuff, right?
Actually, there is. We've noticed like huge sales regarding to Colleen Hoover, and she's really popular on TikTok. And
was she an indie published originally?
She was originally.
Yeah, because it seemed to me like that. It was like a lot of those authors were indie romance authors.
I think that she was firstly on Wattpad, and then she published her own books, and then she got a publisher, something like that. Yeah. But now, we can't get enough of her It Ends With Us, which was published in, I think, 2017, and now it's 2022, and they're still selling like crazy.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I'll see a bestseller list, and there'll be like somebody on it 5 times that I've never heard of, and then I know it's like a viral indie author that just like boom overnight. I'm like, who is that? And then you start seeing it everywhere.
Okay, so hashtag Laini Taylor, hashtag
daughter of
Silk and Bone.
What's the pixie dust I need to sprinkle on TikTok? No, I think that's really, really cool that community exists for sure.
I think it's really cool you came here today, and thank you so much for this conversation. And I hope that you'll visit Croatia on another time and not just convention related.
Yes, me too. There's so much more of the country that I would love to see. And thank you for having me. It was really fun talking to you.
I'm looking forward to your new book.
Thank you.
Whenever it comes out.
Yes. I need to go home and finish it. So.
Okay, run.
Yeah.